Every locality has a church. That is a major principle of church establishment. When the Lord Jesus Christ established churches in the New Testament, it was one church per locality. So, we had a church in Jerusalem. We didn't have churches in Jerusalem. We had a church in Antioch, Syrian Antioch. We didn't have churches in Syrian Antioch. We had a church in Samaria. We had a church in Caesarea. We had a church in Pisidian Antioch. We had a church in Iconium. We had a church in Lystra. We had a church in Derbe. We had a church in Philippi. We had a church in Thessalonica. One church. When addressing the local church over an area, it is pluralized. So you hear the churches of Asia. Why? Asia is an area. Asia is not a locality. Asia is like a province, a state in our own concept. It would be like a state or a region. So when you talk of local, because we've said that you have one church per locality. But the moment you want to consider an area, it is called churches. Why? Because each locality has its own church, and the group of churches in each locality becomes churches. Now, it is crucial that we note something here. I already read Acts chapter 9, verse 31, but it bears repetition in the light of what I just said now. Acts chapter 9, 31. Then the churches throughout all Judea, Galilee, and Samaria had peace and were edified. So Judea, which is a region, had churches. As long as there are believers in a city, then there's a church there. Whether there's a building, doesn't matter. But there are believers in that city, we have a church. If there are believers, okay, let's look at our own place, for example. Port Harcourt. There are believers in Port Harcourt. There's a church in Port Harcourt. We don't have churches in Port Harcourt. I'm coming to discuss that later. You go to Aba. There's a church in Aba. You don't have churches in Aba. You go to Uyo. There's a church in Uyo. You don't have churches in Uyo. But when you now want to consider Port Harcourt, Aba, and Uyo, you talk of churches, pulling the three local churches together. I'm going somewhere with that. In Galatians chapter 1, verse 2, Paul was writing here and said, and all the brethren who are with me to the churches of Galatia. Galatia was a province that comprised of Pisidian Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, and so on and so forth. So all of them, he was writing to them. It was a letter to those churches. Probably what you call a cyclical letter. This one will read and then pass to the other and so on and so forth.